everyone, good evening, and welcome to our third ever Game for Thought live stream series. My name is Allie Weiss, and I am a community manager here at Howest Hogeschool's campus for digital arts and entertainment. So if you've joined us for our previous Game for Thought streams, the one in November about sex and violence, and the one in December about discrimination and representation in games, we're super happy to have you back for this stream here tonight. And if you're new to the Game for Thought series, if you're just scrolling through Twitch and decided to pop by, we're super happy to have you here. So just a quick overview of what the Game for Thought series is all about. So obviously in the game sector, in an industry that is so technical, sometimes it's easier than we like to think to lose sight of these more socially, ethically relevant topics. So we thought it would be a good idea to just have a space where we could talk about these issues. And so we pick a different topic every month. And this month's topic is games and addiction. So once again, we are very happy to have you here. So we'll go over as well the schedule for tonight and our panel participants. So we will start out with a presentation from Matthias De Wilde. Matthias helps young adults with excessive gaming behaviors, and he also promotes a healthy online-offline balance, and he'll be sure to discuss more of that in his presentation. And so after a 20-minute presentation by Matthias, we will move into the panel discussion, which will be the bulk of our conversation here tonight. The panel discussion will take part in two different sections. So for the first bit, we will be covering pre-submitted questions from all of you out there. And for the last about 30 minutes or so, we will cover questions that were submitted in the Twitch chat. So you are welcome to submit your very own questions during the entire stream. Just make sure you go ahead and you put a Q before your question, so we know to go ahead and send that to the moderator. So in case you're wondering who exactly is on the panel tonight, I am very happy to read off our awesome list of participants for the evening. So on our panel tonight will be David Verbruchen. And so David represents the Belgian Entertainment Association and also the Flemish Games Association. Also joining David will be Roseanne de Kock from KU Leuven. She is the project supervisor of the Gameable project. Leen de Kort will also be joining us tonight, and she is the president of the Responsible Gaming Commission under the jurisdiction of the National Lottery, and she also represents the Belgian Association for Research. We have two students on our panel tonight. One of them actually was a panelist on our first ever Game for Thought stream. So Joao de Seger, he is a second-year game graphics production student here at Digital Arts and Entertainment. Joao, we're happy to have you back. And we also have a student, Arna van Kershaver. He is a third-year game development student. And the entire discussion will be moderated by Christophe de Bont, who is a freelance journalist for some clients that include De Standaard, the Flemish Games Association, and the Flanders District of Creativity. So again, we really encourage you to submit your questions in the chat. You are free to do so for the entirety of the stream. Just make sure you go ahead and put a Q before your question. Also, this is a space where we sometimes discuss some controversial, sensitive topics. So we just ask that you keep it respectful in the chat. You just keep it mature and have these conversations with collective growth in mind. And it's really important that we do challenge each other's views because I think in those moments we learn the most, but just make sure to do so respectfully. So again, thank you so much for joining our third Game for Thought stream about games and addiction. And without further ado, I will pass it over to our guest speaker for the night, Matthias De Wilde. Matthias?
Yes.
Matthias, you can go ahead and get started.
I think we're started. It's like awesome. Great to be here. It's my first time on Twitch, so I'm a bit in between excited and stressed, but I'm sure it'll be great. I'm going to be talking about games and addiction, something I have a lot of experience with because I used to struggle with a game addiction as well myself. And there's a few things I want to share with you tonight. The first is, of course, my story. I'm going to share a bit about that. Then I'm going to talk about games and addiction. What is it? Why do some people get addicted? Are the types of people that are very prone to getting addicted to gaming? Then I'm going to give some advice, some tips from my experience with my own life, but also with a lot of the people I work with who struggle with game addiction, how to overcome it. And then at some point, at the end, I'm also going to be talking about how to prevent game addiction as well. So, my story. I used to get into touch with gaming. It was about 20 years ago, a little bit longer even, when I was about 10 to 12 years old. I'm 5 now. I got my first Sega Mega Drive. That was before PlayStation existed, Xbox existed. I found it very cool. And one of the first games I played was FIFA. Now, of course, it looks a little bit different than now than how it used to. But that is the game that I basically was was my introduction to gaming. Of course, after a while, I started playing other games. I really enjoyed FIFA, but I started doing other things. I started playing like on a Game Boy. I loved playing like simulator games, strategy games, Command and Conquer, SimCity, Roller Coaster Tycoon, all these kinds of things. And at some point, when I got a little bit older, I started discovering games like Counter-Strike. That was also at that point, internet started becoming more and more mainstream. There were internet cafes where I used to go to, and then play with some classmates. Counter-Strike, Team Fortress Classic, also, and it was fairly innocent, but that's the point when it started getting a little bit more out of hand. I spent more and more time at home playing these games, and I had a little bit of a difficulty, getting out, going out, going to bars, going to parties where a lot of my classmates went to, and friends. For me, it was very stressful environments. Try to avoid it as much as possible, and I just prefer to stay at home playing games. And then at some point, I went to study in Mechelen. I studied something like programming, and at that point, a game came out called World of Warcraft. I started playing it, and I started being entirely absolved into it. At some point, I was playing it much more than I was studying. Even it was, I loved it so much. Everything else had to go on the side, so I could spend more and more times playing World of Warcraft. But at some point, it became an absolute addiction because I didn't do anything else anymore. I just did the bare minimum for my studies. I started studying like just when the exams came up, and then usually getting more exams during the summer time. So I spent more and more time gaming. At some point, it was even after my studies, I spent 9 months at home just playing World of Warcraft day and night, and that was pretty much my life. I had a lot of social anxiety. I had a hard time coming outside, talking to people, looking for a job, all these kinds of things. I very uncomfortable, and I just stayed at home playing games all night and all day. Now, at some point, that changed. That was when I almost accidentally got a phone call from a company, and they offered the job, and they for me to come by and to see if maybe a job would be a thing with them. It was in sales, which was, of course, for me was very awkward, because you had to talk to people in sales. But at that point, I thought, why not? I'll give it a shot. And at the beginning, it was very difficult because of course, I still had all the anxiety. And I was probably the worst salesperson ever because I still remember my first client. And the client came and I just ran away. So I didn't sell a lot. It was cell phone contracts at the time that I was selling, Mobistar. And so anyway, but I stayed. I got a lot of tips from my colleagues. They really helped me a lot. And after a while, I started discovering and I started seeing like how I can improve. And up until that point, I was very passionate about gaming and about becoming the best in the games. I'm very competitive, but nothing outside of that. And now I had like the same drive and the same, desire to be better in my work in sales. And I started reading books, really listening to colleagues, trying out different techniques. And at some point, after a few months, I became one of the top salespeople, first in my company. First in my team. And then at some point, one of the best salespeople in Belgium. So this was like a total shift from one extreme almost to the other extreme. It was very strange to experience it. My parents didn't know what was happening to me, but I enjoyed it a lot. And that really brought me into personal development. I started thinking about how else in my life can I take on things. I started reading books a lot about business and marketing and life skills and all these things. And one of the things I spent a lot of time developing the past 10, 15 years was my social skills, because for me, that was still very awkward at talking in front of a group of people. I was very scared of all those things. And so I started following workshops. I started, public speaking workshops, doing theater also, dance classes, everything, just to get outside, to meet people, to make friends. Because up until that point, I had very little offline friends. I had a lot of friends in Warcraft spread all out over Europe, but not so many people to actually meet with and talk with nearby. And so for me, my 30th birthday party was like it was so nice to have all these people, all these friends that I made in the past couple of years, and to have this big birthday party, because all my birthdays before that were pretty much just me, all on my own. Maybe my family that came by, or maybe one or two was pretty much it. And so it was a huge shift from 10 years ago when I was totally addicted to games. And that's also when I started, after doing a couple sales jobs a few years ago, I started Game Changers, because I felt like maybe some others are struggling with game addiction. And that's when I started doing lectures in schools. I've talked in about 130 schools, given my lecture almost 200, 300, 400 times. Sometimes I give multiple in the same school in a row, to about 25,000 children, where I inspire children to find balance between the on and the offline world. I started giving workshops also together with my colleague who I started Game Changer with. And right now, of course, because the lectures and the workshops are not so common, but even before that, I did and still do a lot of coaching. So I work with a lot of gamers who are struggling with game addiction, and also or just problematic gaming, and mostly parents who contact us who are struggling with their children, usually 12, 13, 14 to 20, 25 years old, where gaming is getting out of hand. So that's a bit my story. Now, what is game addiction? Maybe you may be wondering this. There's a lot of thoughts about this. A few years ago, the American Psychiatric Association, the World Health Organization, they started to recognize gaming addiction as an actual mental disorder. It's called Internet Gaming Disorder. They made this test with 9 questions, and it would be a bit too broad to discuss all right here, but there's like a few that really stand out on deciding, like, is gaming really an addiction or not? And one of them is, for example, tolerance. What does that mean? Is do you need like more and more gaming to feel the same amount of satisfaction as you used to when you started gaming? Because it's like drinking. The first time you drink alcohol, maybe for someone who is struggling with alcohol addiction, or used to struggle with alcohol addiction, after a while, just drinking 1 or 2 or 3 glasses isn't enough anymore. After a while, they need 10, 20, maybe even more to feel that same amount. And is that the same? Is the same happening with games? That could be something to ask yourself. Escapism. Are you using games to escape negative feelings, negative thoughts? Is it like a coping mechanism that you use? And are you continuing to game despite having real life problems? So, for example, maybe your studies are not going so well. Maybe your friendships, your offline friendships, are not doing too well, or you're having a lot of discussions with your family, with your parents, and it's a bit difficult, and you feel like gaming is not having a positive impact on it. Are you still continuing to game despite knowing that it may be causing problems? So these are like a few of the elements to consider thinking about gaming addiction. But even then, you need to have it like for almost a year before you can get an official diagnosis of a game addiction. But in my opinion, it doesn't really matter. Call it game addiction, call it problematic, call it whatever you want. For me, the real question is gaming having a negative impact on your life? That's really what the question is about. And if that is the case, well, then it is time to do something about it. Even before it's having a negative impact on your life, preferably. But gaming is not meant to ruin your life. It's something to have fun with. It's something to enjoy with friends. Something to do every now and then. But it's not something to get into trouble with. Hopefully, like I did. So how many people are actually addicted? So these are numbers I have from Belgium, because of course I work a lot in Belgium, but I assume they're in most Western countries very similar. So for teenagers, 12 to 18, about 11% is problematic. And for about 3% of the people, it is even an addiction, which is actually quite a lot. If you think 3% of children, and actually for adults, it's also around 2%. But if you take teenagers, that's about 60,000 people. That's almost as much as, well, that's pretty much as much as my hometown of Sint Niklaas. So that's actually a lot of people. That's a lot. And of course, it's not so visible because, a lot of these people are at home. You don't see them. It stays inside. So it's not very a visible issue. So why do some people get addicted? This is an excerpt from the book that I wrote, a book which is coming out next month. I'm sorry, it's in Dutch, I know. But basically, there's a few factors to take into account. And the first thing is games. Some games are more addictive than others. It depends a lot on what kind of elements are built into the games. Are they online? Can you play with others? And usually the most successfully designed games are also the most addictive. Because the most sold, the most used, the most played games. You could say they are a success when it comes to game design, but maybe they're a little bit too much of a success because for some others it becomes very hard to stop. So some games are more addictive than others. Some people are more prone to get addicted than others. Some people can easily just play a little game or play some matches, play some games, and just put it on the side. For others, it becomes very hard to put on the side. So some people are more prone to getting addicted. I'll explain who in the next part. And then the surroundings. Some surroundings, maybe you're getting bullied at school. Maybe you're just not feeling very well yourself. Maybe some health issues, maybe some family issues, parents are divorcing or something else. There's a lot of things that can be going on in your life. Maybe you're struggling in school, that can have an extra element to cause to help cause a game addiction. So these three elements are quite important. And who is more susceptible to addiction? There's a few things I want to share here. First, what I see, I pretty much when people come to me who are struggling with gaming, I always see almost the exact same profile of people that are struggling. Sometimes there are a little bit differences, but mostly they're very similar. So usually there are people who are more introverted than extroverted. And why is this? It's because, gaming, in a way, it gives a very comfortable way to be social online. It's a lot easier to manage, and it's a lot more comfortable than face-to-face conversation. Face-to-face is very hard. Some people also just like to spend lots and lots of time on their own, and this makes gaming a lot more attractive to them, and sometimes also problematic gaming. Secondly, they're also more thinkers than feelers. This means, what do I mean with that? Is they spend a lot of time in their head, thinking about things, thinking about the future, thinking about abstract thoughts and ideas. And they have a lot more difficulty just living in the moment, being in the moment, just enjoying the sun, enjoying the grass, enjoying. They're constantly in their mind. It's like their ideas are racing at 200 miles an hour. And what do games? So why are games so attractive for these people? It's because games are based on logic. It's like chess. In chess, it's very black and white. Well, it is literally black and white, but the rules are very easy. And it's very logical. It's very analytical. There is very little room for vagueness, and it's much easier to grasp and to understand for many of these people than real life, and especially social interactions, which is much harder to understand and to get. And then the last part here is that they are usually fairly intelligent. Some people are even gifted that I coach. And one of the reasons that these games are very attractive to these people is because they offer endless challenges, especially when you can play against, there's always someone you can play against in the whole world that is your level, maybe a little bit better than you. So there's always this feeling of challenge. There's always these, maybe if you playing single player. These are all these NPCs or bosses that you can play against. And something that is quite common is, so next to the besides gifted people, is autism is very, very frequent. So people with autism are very likely to be attracted to gaming. And HDHD is also something that I see quite often. And of course, it's not just gaming, because if these guys are not gaming, they're watching Netflix, they're watching Twitch, YouTube, maybe Reddit, 9gag, Discord, all these things. Probably often switching from one thing to the other, and then gaming, and then back and switching, and so forth. So it's basically just a very, very big attraction to screens in general. So what can you do about this? This is, of course, a good question. First of all, if you feel like maybe it's a bit of an issue for you, the first step is to accept that it's an issue. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, I mean, of course, it's not maybe the best situation to be in, but it's not the end of the world. There are things you can do, and I'm going to give some tips also. But the first thing is to accept it. It's accept that gaming is having a negative impact on your life, maybe screen usage in average, in general. And also, one of the things to accept is that the urge is stronger than yourself. And one of the things I usually see with like younger gamers who are struggling is like, no, I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to do it myself. I'm going to fix it. It's going to be okay. I can control it. And every time they say they're going to do it and they're going to control it, but they still have these games next to them, and here they have school. The urge is just too big. It's too big. They can't control it, just like I used to. It's just very difficult to say no to gaming because it's so attractive to these people. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something to accept. It's very important to accept that. And then the second step is to set boundaries. It's very hard, like I said, to have, to take time to do schoolwork or to do things with the family if these attractive, maybe addictive technologies are next to you. So try and search or try to create screen and internet-free zones and times. For example, one of the challenges can be on the toilet, not to take your phone with you during dinner, especially at night. Also, not to have to try to. I know it's very tempting usually for gamers to be on quite a lot of the hours at night, but try and limit those moments and those times. What also usually helps is to have separate devices and locations. So, for example, maybe you can have one room, maybe your bedroom, for example, for gaming, and then another room, maybe the living room or the office or something else. So if you have one room for the gaming, then you can have the other room for schoolwork, for example. So try and have different locations, different devices for work and entertainment. Another thing that helps is to avoid certain types of entertainment. So, for example, one of the things I've done is I try to avoid as much as possible online games. I still game from then to then sometimes, but I try to avoid the competitive online games because usually it gets a bit out of hand with me when I do that because I'm just very competitive. And when I'm playing, I want to win. I want to be the best. And also one of the things I haven't done in a long time now is watch series on Netflix. I notice whenever I want to watch one, whenever I start watching one, I have to watch the whole series, all the seasons of that series. So I just don't start watching series, for example. Sometimes maybe some movies, but that's it. So just know what is like difficult for you, and then make a decision. Like, I'm not going to use that application anymore. I'm not going to use that, that thing that is very difficult to control. What also helps is to create some accountability partners, maybe like people to study, to work together. And it's okay to be bored. Now, I think this is such a difficult thing for many of these guys, including myself, is to just accept being bored, to not being online, doing things, playing games, watching movies, watching videos, watching all these things. So creating some space outside of gaming. And then the next step, the third step, is to fill the void and create some balance in life. So take steps forward in different areas of your life, because it's one thing to put a limit on the gaming and screens, but if nothing else comes into place, then it's going to be very tempting to go back to screens after a while as well. So other things need to come into place, and try to find some kind of balance between school and work and social life, health, and things. Finding new hobbies, new passions. Many of the guys I coach are usually very prone to how should I say, obsessions is maybe not the nicest word, but it's basically what it is. You could also say hyper focus or something like that. But usually they go from one obsession to the other. In my life, it's always been the similar. I all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I need to work on I'm going to work on my health, and then I go to the gym for 2 months straight, like a madman, and then I crash. It's too much. So finding balance has been a challenge for me and many of the people I coach. But it helps to find new hobbies, new passions besides gaming that may be easier to control. And of course, to build friendships, to build relationships outside of gaming. It can be so tempting to just have some online friends. But after a while, the danger is just like with me when I was 18, 19 years old, I started dropping out all my other, not managing all my other friendships, and one after the other, they started disappearing. So stay on that, and also be open to receiving support. Very important. And then the last thing is to become a hero in real life. This is the final step. Is it the most fun step? Sometimes one of the more challenging steps. But what do I mean with that? And that's what I see. Like when I coach people, it's very very nice. At like the end of the thing, like at the end, they actually become like leaders for their friends. They're like, hey, let's go do something, and hey, you wanna let's go running, or let's go, whatever. And I know, of course, now it's a bit more difficult with Corona and stuff like that, but these are the guys that are actually being proactive. They, instead of their parents always having to tell them to wake up and to go do something and to clean the dishes, they start doing it from. How cool is that? Instead of waiting for deadlines from your teachers to get into action and doing stuff, they start working on things weeks before it has to be done. So this is often one of the big challenges. But once it starts to work like this, your life can really start working for you. It's a huge difference. So being proactive, start taking, action in your life, reaching out to others, helping out, being an example can really help as well. Becoming the best version of yourself, and ultimately, making a game out of life. Just like for me, when I had this focus in the past of being the best in World of Warcraft, started switching it to work, and it gave me a lot of more satisfaction and structure and social things in my life, and in the and now it's in my job, in my work with Game Changers, to try and make that the best possible. So there's a few things. I'm going to check the time. Okay, there's a few things I'm going to quickly say about how to prevent game addiction. And the first thing is, there's a few roles here. There's a few roles that that can help with preventing game addiction. And the first is, of course, the industry. A lot of game development industries, game designers do great work to create incredible games. And then, of course, we, the gamers or consumers, start using them. And that's where things get interesting, because, of course, these game design companies, they're not idiots. They have teams of programmers, hundreds, thousands of programmers and marketeers and behavioral psychologists who are reading books like Irresistible and Hooked and other stuff to think like, how can we get people to play more our games than that of the competition? And so they implement all these tactics and technologies and all these little techniques into their games to keep people hooked, you could say, in a way. And that's where things start getting out of hand, because then all of a sudden, these kids, they start getting aggressive. Parents are starting to worry, like, oh, no, what is my son doing? He won't come to eat anymore. Or he comes very too late, or they come to eat and then they disappear to their room again after that. They can't get them off the games anymore. They start spending lots and lots of money on skins, and some gamers also start getting into trouble with school. And that's usually the point where both parents and gamers are like, help, this is getting totally out of hand. And then these consumers, they're like, government, what are you doing about this? What are you doing? And the government's like, oh no, the people are unhappy, we have to do something. And so then, of course, this is pretty much this is with gaming. This is for pretty much any industry. That's when the government steps in, and then they're like, "Oh, we need to do something. You know what? We're going to stop this loot box things. Apparently, it's very dangerous. Maybe in the future, who knows? We're going to put some games for 18 plus. For example, in China, there's actually a limit for minors They can only play, I think, 90 minutes a day during the week and 180 minutes during the weekend. And they can't play during nighttime, so there's like a curfew for gaming. So this may seem a bit strange, but I fear that that's when it comes back to the industry. So if the industry keeps making these games in a way that people start getting into trouble, what's going to and game addiction becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, chances are that the government will have to take more and more measures, and limits will just have to increase, and it will be a lot more difficult. Or just game design companies will have to take a lot more into account. So there's a few pointers I want to give, and then we're gonna close. So what can then we're gonna go to the panel. So what can the government do? First of all, I think it's important to create awareness. So for example, lectures, information, brochures, anything to get more the word out to people that game addiction is real, it exists, people can get addicted, like myself. I did, and it's something to be aware of. Luckily, it's like still only 3% that get addicted. Maybe more now during the corona. I don't know. Probably it's a bit higher, but there are no numbers yet. But it is real. And another thing I think the government can do is to protect minors from addictive processes. There's like gambling mechanisms. Maybe is it really necessary to have like unlimited online spending available? Like I sometimes have children, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, who are like spending hundreds, maybe thousands of euros from the parents' credit card on games like Fortnite, or League of Legends, or other things, maybe Roblox, Minecraft as well, and unlimited online access. I think it's important that the government starts to step in and do things about that, and also to help provide accessible therapy programs, workshops, coaching, therapy, whatever, for people who are struggling with it, preferably before they are in an addiction, so we can avoid it. Secondly, what can consumers do is, so first of all, educate yourself. What is video game addiction? Also, like I started reading a lot of books about what is the internet doing to my brain, like how, because I there have been times that I struggle with gaming, even during that phase in my life where I was working a lot on myself. Sometimes I would relapse, and I'm like, what is going on here? Why is it so hard for me to not watch YouTube and not watch all these sites, play games and do all these things? And so I started researching a lot about, what are these behavioral mechanisms that trigger this behavior in myself. So educate yourself, read books like, for example, The Shallows, a good book about technology in our brain. Game in moderation, and very important, help others that are struggling as well. And please don't accept abusive game design. I think in the past there have been like some outrages when it comes to companies implementing some abusive game design. I'm going to share that in the next slide also, some examples. But it's good that we hold companies accountable to make games that are fun and interactive, but not addictive, preferably. So what can the game industry do? That's the last part. Is I think, and this is like more like an open-ended question. I think we're probably going to be discussing this also. One of the things we're going to be discussing in the panel after this is, when does game design go too far? There's a few things I think that come to mind. In my case, is like one of the games I used to play, World of Warcraft. It has like a very low. There are items that people chase for years, because there's like an endless grind, endless goals, endless levels. Gambling mechanisms in games, maybe even unlimited gaming purchases. Is it really necessary to have these in game? Maybe not. I'll leave it open for now. But know that if the game industry does nothing, chances are that the government is going to come in and they're going to say, like, no more games for minors, no more this, no more advertisements for games. It's basically what they've done for the nicotine industry, for alcohol, for gambling. At some point the government comes in and they say, like, this is getting totally out of hand. We have to limit this. So if the game industry doesn't do things themselves, chances are the government will. So what are a few other things the game industry can do? Is, for example, help gamers control gaming time and how much they spend, like money-wise, on it. And here are just a few examples. Like notifications. You've been playing for a while, consider taking a break maybe. One thing, like in World of Warcraft, is bring your friends to Azeroth, but don't forget to go to the site of it. as well. So like kind of like little reminders. It might not be making the biggest difference, but all these kinds of things, they really help. And the ability to set limits, both on spending, on time. Of course, chances are not everyone is going to be using this, but it helps to at least have these kinds of options available. I think every game should have these options in the future as well. And then the last thing is to reward life balancing behavior. And one nice example is from a game I sometimes play called Hearthstone. And for example, they have this like a hero that you can unlock when you go to a local, they call it a fireside brawl. So basically, when you go to like a cafe or some, well, of course, before Corona, now it's a bit more difficult. But when you go to like a local cafe, they sometimes hold these events called fireside brawls. And then when you go there with other people and you play Hearthstone together, then you can unlock this hero. So I think this is really something big that game developers in the future can think about. Like, how can we reward people for going outside, for meeting people, for getting together, for helping others maybe as well? How can we try and implement that in our games to help them find balance? Of course, the big challenge is going to be for these companies to be working together, because let's say one company says, okay, we're going to do all this, like limits and notifications and all these things, and then maybe all the gamers are just going to go to another platform where they don't have this, and the addicted gamers at least. So I think it's important for the platforms to work together, and I think the future is going to be much more about ethical game design. Maybe it's going to be a class in the future in DAA, who knows? I don't know, in Howest. So that was pretty much all I had to say. Thank you. Oh, and we're going to have a few minutes of break, and then we're going to be going to the panel. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. So as Ali explained before, now it's time for the panel discussion, which will be in two parts. First, we'll have some pre-submitted questions, which we will dive into with our panel, and then after that, we will take some audience questions. You can still send them in. Just make sure to put a queue before you put your question so we can pick it up, and maybe we'll answer it later on the stream. So first of all, I would like to thank Matthias for the interesting presentation. I think we have a lot of stuff to dissect here. So I suggest we dive right into it. One of the questions that was asked was, and maybe that's one for Matthias. That is it when we talk about problematic gaming, do you think it's an addiction or is it a mental disorder? Because it's not really, there's still not really a scientific it's not really clear yet.
Well, it's called so basically it's called internet gaming disorder.
Mm-hmm.
That the World Health Organization has described as something they're still researching. It's not like an official diagnosis yet. I mean, they have officially said that they're going to implement it into their systems, but there still needs to be a lot of research done. But it is effectively a mental disorder. If it's a mental disorder or addiction, for me, those are pretty much the same things. Maybe someone else thinks differently about that, but yeah.
Does someone else have another idea about this? Yeah.
In the academic world, there's a heavy debate going on whether you can use addictive or problematic or compulsive or excessive or pathological. And quite often, the debate is not fruitful. So actually, it's more interesting, in my opinion, to look at whether people actually are suffering from gaming too much and having no balance at all in their life. So we can help them. So actually, I agree with Matthias that we don't have to argue about the exactly precise term, but we just have to help people who are suffering from it.
Mm-hmm. If I can add one more thing, for me, gaming addiction is something that you can have for a certain amount of time. But it's something that can be solved. It's something that you can take on, that can change. One of the things that is maybe a little bit more difficult to change is what I like to call game sensitivity. So some people, like I mentioned in the list, are just more sensitive to to getting into gaming and to getting into problematic gaming as well, more than others. And that is something that is much harder to change, but it's not a big deal as long as you're aware of it and you build your life in a way that it's not going to become a problem.
Okay. I understand that the problem in itself is more important, and if people are suffering from it, it's more important than just the terminology of it. But do you feel like the word addiction maybe has some more history behind it? Because when you talk about addiction, people are linking it more easily to alcohol or to drugs. David?
Yeah, I think we as a sector, we don't like the word addiction in these circumstances. But I kind of agree with what is being said. I think if we try to find the right word, then we're maybe missing out on what we actually have to talk about, and that we have to don't bury our heads in the sand and do as if the problem does not exist. On the other hand, I think if you use a word like addiction, it kind of blows up the whole thing. And I hear a lot of parents, for instance, saying, my child is addicted to video games when they play, I don't know, 1 hour a day or 2 hours, but they just keep on doing their hobbies. They work for school. They come to eat when they have to come to eat and stuff like that. So I think the word addiction is very, very heavy word. And so we prefer to not use it.
Yeah, I would like to add on to that I find it very hard to pinpoint exactly when we're talking about addiction exactly for that reason, because I wonder whether or not we can call it an addiction if there are actually negative effects bound to it, or actual negative effects in the future to be seen. Whereas maybe somebody who games, for example, 4 hours a day doesn't have any negative problems with it just yet, and probably won't yet, as far as we know, right? Is that actually an addiction compared to somebody else who might do less and actually does then avoid other things that he should be doing in life, right? So I find it very hard to pinpoint that, in a sense that you gotta have negative effects to really diagnose an addiction properly, if that makes sense.
Sure. So we've established that it's a problem. It's a problem that we need to talk about. Everyone needs to talk about it. Still, Matthias, you mentioned during your presentation, you mentioned, for example, Netflix also being a source of probably of addictive behavior, watching to binge watching or binge drinking. But there's no such thing, for example, as a reading addict. So why is gaming so susceptible to being used in I can't find words. Sorry about this. Why is gaming so susceptible to being used when we're talking about addictive behavior?
So in my opinion, there's a big difference between reading and gaming, but there's actually also a big difference between gaming. Why is gaming addiction now being like a real thing and not Netflix addiction or smartphone addiction? Of course, some people maybe feel like they're a bit addicted to their smartphone, but when it comes to gaming, for some people, it is so attractive, it is so fun, it is so totally, fully absorbing you that it becomes almost impossible to stop. Like, no one can spend 20 hours a day reading a book, but there are people who spend 20 hours a day playing games. Nobody can spend 20 hours a day watching Facebook. Maybe some, maybe few. Maybe you could say maybe few that do Netflix, but after a while you'll get up and you'll do other things. But for gaming, I sometimes have kids 10 years old, and they pee in their pants. They cannot stop. It's so fun. It's so attractive, so addictive for them that it becomes impossible for them to stop. And I think it's a whole other level than many other behaviors for these specific people.
Okay. Rosanne, you also wanted to comment on this?
Yeah, I wanted to have a general overview or a general view on media use, because when we talk about books, even in if you go back in time, then specific kind of books, they were put on a list that were completely prohibited and forbidden. And then we move into time and we go back to movies, and the movies were the ones that you had to shut down because they were so evil and had negative effects on everyone. Then we went to television, then we go to comic books, and now we end up with gaming and social media. So it's of all times, let's say, that new or newer kind of media, they are accused of everything that goes wrong. And of course, today we are focusing on addiction or problematic use. But there's also a whole other side. And let's say that there's only a minority who is suffering from problematic gaming. And the majority of the gamers, they don't have any problems at all. So we are only focusing on a small part. And of course, a small part has to be protected and has to be helped. But media use in general might be a problem for specific kind of people. So we have this kind of susceptibility model of media effects. And when we zoom into gaming, what can make it quite addictive is the fact that you work with kind of levels and rewards, and you want to be good at something, so you want to stand out, let's say. And if we look at the amount of time that's spent on gaming, then we see that the people that are suffering from a problematic use, they game, let's say, about 40 hours a week. So then we end up with a full-time working equivalent, which is quite a lot, of course. But it's not enough to look or to pinpoint and to focus on the amount of time that's being wasted, let's say. But it's also interesting to look at the other aspects that go wrong within the lives of people who suffer from the problematic game use. Because then you see that they lose control of whatever they thought that was important before. So they spend less time with people they like, their friends. They especially want to skip things that they do not like that much. So for instance, if things are not going quite well at school, then you look for a kind of escapism. And so you enter more and more into the online world, in which you can prove yourself that you're good and you have friends out there, and they reward you, they like you, they support you, and they think you're someone who is good and skillful for that. So it's about different elements that make the game susceptible to problematic use, let's say.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, I like to add to that what is happening is that apparently a lot of people don't need to know what a video game is about. They don't have to play it themselves, but they do know how harmful it is, how bad it is for their kids or for other players. So there is this kind of perception in a lot of people's mind today that they know all about video games without experiencing it for themselves, or maybe talking to their kids about it, playing together with their kids. You know, there's a lot of ways to get to know the video game sector and the video games. And the problem is that some of these people are actually policymakers. They're actually people that are in the government deciding on regulations. Other people are maybe psychiatrists or psychologists who decide on these things. And that is, I think, a little troubling, because they don't have this connection with video games. They do know books, they do know series, they do maybe social media a bit, but the distance with video games is big. And I think that also plays a huge role in a lot of misunderstandings and just some people playing out calling out video games for everything that goes wrong in our society. We've been a target as a sector for years. I've been working in this sector for 25 years, and well, there was this violence. We made kids violent. Now we're turning kids into gambling addicts and terrorists even. We're training them to become terrorists. So this is actually, it's dangerous territory. And I wanted to add this too.
Yeah, is that true? Should the industry, should game creators feel guilty in a way for creating great and engaging games?
Is that a question for me, or?
It's maybe one of the students can take that, because from their perspective, do you think you guys are learning how to create games? So how do you look at that?
I can only speak for myself in that we have been. It's a long discussion about whether or not making a game addictive, so to speak, is also like a ribbon to put on the vest of the game, right? I do think there are some blatantly obvious tactics that games put in that are very clearly to identify as to expose the gambling beasts that are inside of us, right? So there are a couple of things that they put in just to make sure that they can actually draw the people that are prone to addiction towards the game. But I also think that there are a lot of situations where a game is addicting just because it's a fun game that can go on for a long time. And then the waters suddenly get very muddy, and suddenly a discussion between if it's not that obvious, like, for example, loot boxes and stuff, which we agreed on, or a lot of people agreed on that that's a non-ethical issue, right? There are also a lot of things like, for example, the mount dropping in World of Warcraft, which has been covered by Matthias, which can be said is because of gambling addiction, but for example, might actually also be viewed in a positive light, in the sense that it actually makes the game go on long and gives you a great sense of achievement. I'm not saying that this denies the fact that it is addictive, but I'm just saying there are a couple of situations as well where it's not as blatantly obvious that it's made for addiction, or rather just as to make a very fun game that feels very rewarding. But I'm sure Yao also has a couple of things, or might be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's the difficulty, as I said, is like it kind of gets into a gray area. Like, what is fun and addicting in a neutral sense? Like, this game has good gameplay, so it's fun to play for 400 hours, or this game deliberately has systems in place to make me keep playing, like a login bonus, or microtransactions for gambling. Like, where do you draw the line of this is okay to have more people play your game for longer, and at what point do you say, okay, no, this is actually causing addiction, or making susceptible people addicted to your game, and that's bad? Like, where do you draw that exact line of saying, okay, you stop here with your development of that mechanic or something? That's kind of something that I think most game developers, they don't have a background in psychology. I know a friend of mine who makes games had a bachelor in psychology, and he was aware of these things where, oh, I shouldn't be making these types of mechanics in my game because that might give issues later on. Like, most developers are just, they're programmers, or they were very they liked playing games as a kid, and now they learn how to make them themselves. They don't have the ethical or the psychological background to know, oh, this is probably going to be problematic, or this is going to maybe kind of seem as a gambling mechanic, and it's going to lure people in to play like that. I guess I don't know that. I think having more psychiatrists or people in that field kind of be part of the industry and kind of be brought in to say, okay, we have this game, can you help us make sure it's not addicting in the bad ways? I think that should be something that should be considered. But yeah.
I think teams like Epic, for example, already work with psychologists, but I'm not really sure they're employing them to do just that, and maybe just do the opposite so it's difficult. That being said, though, is in your opinion, is is a game company, because Matthias highlighted that a lot of problems considering addiction are rooted in a deeper psychological, personal level. Is a game company, how far does the responsibility of a game company go to make sure somebody who's susceptible to addictive behavior doesn't become addicted? Rosanne, do you have anything to say about that?
I think it's a matter of shared responsibilities. You have the side of the customer, the user, the parents of the customer when it's about young children, for instance, and of course you have the side of the developer. And I think it's not the intention of game developers to develop a game that will become addictive in the sense that it's going to be harmful for people. They just want to make a game which is fun to play and that's attractive and that has a lot of people that are interested in it. So I think that the intention is not there to develop something that's bad, but I think that the awareness and the advice that Zhao just gave about the psychological aspects that have to be entered in, let's say, the program of game developers is an important one. Because actually what you could do by developing your game is kind of making a psychological Skinner box, and the pigeons that are pressing the handle, they're not the pigeons, but they're the people. And why are you pressing the handle? Because you want to be rewarded. So this kind of operational conditioning aspect, instrumental conditioning, because you want to get further down in the game, they have to be, you have to be very conscious about it and how you can develop it in a bad way, let's say. But I think it's about a shared responsibility. And some of the players are more vulnerable than others towards these addictive elements. But what we see in research is that you have people that are quite vulnerable in the rest of their lives as well. And they are looking for a way to feel better. So for them, the game is become a kind of mood regulator. Things are going bad in real life because of the personal situation, because of tensions at home, because of the fact that they don't find someone with whom they have a nice click. And they jump into the virtual world to feel better. And that's a kind of alarm signal in which you need to give them a hand to get out of it. But the question is, of course, how can we develop nice games without having the dark patterns in it?
Well, David, yeah?
Yeah, I totally agree. Concerning the dark patterns, of course, I represent the sector, and Matthias made a point. All the companies need to work together. Not all of those companies do that. There are some companies, for instance, not to name them, but Steam, for instance, we don't represent that company, and it's a shame because they actually do things that harm our sector. But I wanted to say that we, as a sector, we do a lot of things already, and the dark pattern thing, our companies, they don't do this. We don't use algorithms to make people addicted to games. It has to be fun. We don't have any interest in making consumers, players, addicts. This is something that will not help us as an industry at all. So rest assured that is really not our intention. But as a sector, we try to help and we try to do things. And it's not easy, of course, to manage all this. I have a long list of things that we do, but maybe we can come back to that later. I don't want to take up all your time, but we do a lot of things. We have PEGI, we have the parental controls. You can actually limit spending in a game. You can limit playtime. These tools exist. A lot of parents don't know it. And sometimes it's maybe too difficult to set things up. So we have to work on this. And rest assured that as a sector, we're doing a lot of things, informing people about all these tools that are available. And there are loads more than the ones that I'm just calling out now, but I'll maybe check in later to add some more. I don't want to take all of the time.
Sure. Lane, you also wanted to add something to that?
I wanted to add 2 things. All I heard Rosanna saying it's a shared responsibility between the developer and the gamer or his parent. I think it's even larger than that, because you have the publicists also, you have like social media making a lot of publicity about this. It's more about a whole world built around it. And I think it's a very big shared responsibility with a lot of stakeholders, not just one stakeholder, but a lot of different stakeholders. Second thing, I'm here representing a bit the consumer organizations, but also the Responsible Gaming Commission of the National Lottery. So, well, something in that field. And for what is responsible gaming and gambling, they have like tools they are using at lottery level to try to make an objective analysis of each game they want to propose to the markets. Of course, this is voluntarily, and a lot of lotteries use it, but not a lot of private gamble institutions. But it's already a first step forward that such a framework can exist, and maybe it can be useful to discuss about such a framework, an objective analyze tool for gaming industry. Maybe it's something that can help, but in the lottery field, they're very happy about having this. Because when a bad game is proposed, they can try to make some modifications that it's less addictive. So just food for thought.
Another way, if a government thinks an industry isn't able to self-regulate, is to put regulations on it. In Belgium, loot boxes have been effectively banned. Is that a way to regulate? Is there a way to regulate addictiveness? How do you go about that? Is that a right decision?
We were very much in favor of the ban on loot boxes, so that seemed for us the right decision. Why? Also because we want to make it very clear that there should be a great distinction between gaming and gambling. We are not accepting that there are gambling elements in games. Just because we are aware that also vulnerable people like youngsters are playing this, and we do not want to expose them to gambling elements. So for us, it was the right way forward. It can be done also for other addictive elements. Like it was said in the presentation, if industry doesn't move forward to protect more the player, maybe government can make some actions to limit time playing, to limit also the microtransactions and so on. But yeah, maybe it's very useful that industry also acts first, and that we can see afterwards what is needed.
Of course, I would like to react to this. First and foremost, video games are not gambling, and loot boxes are not gambling. We don't agree with this. Of course, this is going to be a debate for a long time, I think, but we really don't agree. The way that the Belgian gambling legislation works is that it is such a broad definition that a lot of things fall under it. If you look at the 4 criteria that the law uses, loot boxes can fall into it. Paid loot boxes, of course, because we also have the free ones. But a school raffle also falls under it. You cannot do a legal school raffle in Belgium unless you have the agreement of the police. Pokemon cards were actually also under this law, but they got an exemption years ago. Maybe it's because one of the biggest companies making those cards is a Belgian company. So what I want to say is that the process which has been used to ban loot boxes in Belgium is, to me, actually a bit of a disgrace, because the way that it has been dealt with in Belgium is very strange. We were never consulted as a sector. They never talked to us. There's a report from the Gambling Commission that has been leaked to the press without any information to the sector before. We were never consulted, and there are loads of more elements regarding this procedure. And I'm not leaving the content discussion. I don't want to step away from this debate, but I think just plain out simply ban something without actually knowing what it's all about. If you look at the report, there are so many things that are wrong in this report, and so many things that are not even mentioned. There's no mention of parental control. Skin gambling is not mentioned at all. Skin gambling, that is actually an issue of gambling if you want to talk about gambling. So yeah, we don't agree with that point of view. And also, for instance, in Sweden, the Gambling Commission very recently also said that loot boxes are no gambling because there is no real money cash out. You can never cash out real world money from a loot box. And that, unless you use skin gambling, of course, which is dealt with on illegal third-party websites. And we believe that this is a major difference between the real casino life, where you hope to better your life by winning a lot of money and just, relaxing the rest of your days, which is a huge difference in opening a loot box and hoping that you get this nice outfit. So there is a difference for us.
Yeah, but I understand that you said that there is no direct money unless you told yourself if you go to the skin gambling sites outside of the game. But how do you think that we can tackle this issue? Because it's interlinked.
That's a major issue. We've been asking governments all over the world for years to help us do something about this. But of course, these are illegal websites. They operate from countries like Malta, and it's very difficult to take them down. In Denmark, the government a few years ago took down 25 of those websites. And a few days later, they were up and running again from other servers from other countries. But this is actually if you talk about gambling, then we really should do something about this. And we have been asking this to governments for years already, but there is nothing moving a lot, except for instance, Denmark. But in Belgium, it's not even mentioned. The report of the Belgian Gambling Commission does not even mention this. A lot of people also don't know what skin gambling is and how it works. So for viewers that don't know it, it's a way of illegally getting virtual goods out of a game and getting or money from it or using it in betting, sports betting or something. The value of it can be used. And so this is actually a big problem.
Arne, do you feel there's a big difference between loot boxes and skin gambling?
I think I'm kind of divided in this subject because, first of all, I do think that loot boxes is somewhat of a bad practice. Now, this is coming from a gamer's perspective, foremost, so not necessarily from an addiction perspective. If we're talking about legality of things, I do think that banning something somewhat encourages people that go under the law to somehow get their goods elsewhere, right? And that way you can't really regulate it. So I think banning loot boxes in a way might actually encourage more skin gambling. And if that is the case, I do really feel that, yes, it doesn't, I don't know quite if it feeds as much into addiction of video games as it does. But what I do know is that skin gambling for sure brings into the element of actual money and illegal practices, which, I think just banning the loot boxes in general just encourages that behavior. So I would say I'm not a fan of skin gambling. I'm not a fan of loot boxes, but I think banning loot boxes might actually encourage the first.
Joe, do you agree?
Yeah, I do kind of agree with that it encourages those things. When you ban something, for example, more extreme example being drugs, as soon as you make it illegal, it becomes harder to regulate. And I do feel like the banning of loot boxes specifically was maybe a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh, we need to get this quick. Because especially Overwatch was in the news at the time, was quite widespread, so they needed to have some sort of action. They couldn't just do nothing because you would have worried parents who are misinformed or uninformed be like, why is this not getting dealt with and stuff. But at the same time, it's not because something isn't gambling. Like, you can argue that fact if it is or isn't. But with loot boxes or those kinds of mechanics where you can use real currency to buy digital items, it can be addicting, even if it's not gambling. I remember a few years ago there was a game, Warframe, where they added mechanic like that. You could pay real money to get a skin. And they thought, oh, that's fun. People can exchange it with their friends and they can like resell it for in-game currency. Never any real money attached to it as soon as you bought it, right? You could never get real money out of it. But they saw one person pull it 200 times in a row. They bought 200 of those items with real money. And they went, oh, that's not good, right? We should remove that because that's clearly not what we wanted. That's a bad mechanic. The person is clearly addicted to this. So even though it's not a gambling thing, it maybe shouldn't have been banned. It's still a thing of if developers themselves don't realize that it's a problem, that it's causing people with addiction or susceptible to it to, fall into that trap, that, government should step in and say, okay, yeah, we're going to you can't have that system in our country because clearly it's not good for our population, right? Despite it not being gambling, like, you can argue with that, but it's still like, is it bad for people? I kind of do agree with that. That's my opinion on it.
If I can quickly make a reference to the game where it all started with, Star Wars Battlefront 2. Remember 2018 premium game, and it has loot boxes. The game has been changed. There are so many people that said this is not okay, this tactic that you're using. And so Electronic Arts changed the game. And this is actually what's interesting, is that we have this self-regulation going on in our sector. We move much quicker than what governments can do. And if things get really out of hand, they get changed. I'm speaking for the companies that I represent right now. I'm unable to speak for all the companies that make games on this planet. But I believe in the fact that if it is really outrageous and the gamers voice their concerns, that the companies even change it, and it happens also.
So do you think major consumer backlash is needed to self-regulate then?
No, that's not necessary, because some things are being changed even before the game comes out. But what I'm saying is that if people really are vocal about some things, and if it's kind of a blatant thing, then it gets changed. This is something that in our industry is happening a lot of the times, and it's something that I don't see it quite often in other sectors. Well, it's starting. The Sonic movie got changed too, because the people weren't happy with the way it would pan out. No, I'm just saying that this is something, the self-regulation thing in our sector. I know there's a lot of criticism about it. Yeah, it doesn't work, and those companies, we need to regulate them, and so we're not against regulation. I also want to quickly state this: we're not against it, but we don't think that gambling regulation is the way forward for our sector. We already adhere to a lot of consumer regulation, European consumer regulation, and regulation all over the place. And we believe that we should talk about that kind of regulation. It's a less fragmentized regulation. Gambling is very national. And also gambling, it also has a link with taxes going to governments. And we think we should really talk about consumer protection. That is the major thing, and we really want to move forward on that part and do our part and talk about consumer regulation.
So when you talk about consumer protection,
Sorry.
Yeah.
That I don't understand, but consumer protection, it's more about protecting the consumer from a legal point of view, from a health point of view. I do agree that there is a difference between gambling and gaming, but it's just a distinction that we want to be clear so that there's no interference. But apart from that, also for games, you should have a health discussion one way and a legal discussion the other way. If we're talking about consumer protection, it's only about the legal protection, about can I get my money back if something is not right in the game or some things like that. It should be larger than that. It should be also about health.
Yes, of course, and we do. We talk about it. We have our consumer websites. We even work with Game Changers. They are a partner of our organization. So we really want to be able to give some first aid. Of course, we're no psychologists. We cannot help these people with their problems, but we can try to help them see the first signals. What can you do in that stage? Where can you go? You can go to the Drugland, you can go to Game Changers, you can go to, there's a lot of instances in our country that can help you if you are in that position. And as a sector, we also communicate a lot about that. You can go to our websites, speelhetslim.be or jouermalin.be if it's in French. And so we really don't ignore this, and we want to help people, and we want to try to work together with anyone on making sure that we have as less people with this problem as possible. I don't personally, this is my personal opinion, I don't believe that we can eradicate this problem altogether. I don't think that Chinese measures are the way forward. I think we don't want to live in a police state. I think in the pandemic that kind of popped up a bit, that we clearly don't want to live in a police state. But if we go that route, if we go in banning things, limiting time from a government perspective, then we really are becoming a police state. And this is a very dangerous evolution.
Yeah, I somewhat agree as well. I think, as to bring it back to like games and addiction, right? Pretty much the subject has been, what can companies do and what can the state do to prevent this addiction, right? Gambling for sure is very big. It's pretty obvious to say that gambling, like blatant gambling, like maybe loot boxes, if you even agree that is gambling, that is not a good thing in games. And as been mentioned before, companies do listen to their customers if they're loud enough. I do not think that it's a good idea to scream about every decision that your company makes for the games are developed, but I do think it's important to consider the relation between company and user more, because companies do seem to notice nowadays when their consumer base is very unhappy with the game and the state of how it tries to make use of the gambling addiction and et cetera, et cetera. So I do think the state should, of course, interfere if there are very blatant things, but I think it should be avoided. And I think it's very important to make sure that the relationship between company and user becomes more transparent, so that companies do get punished by less sales because of these things that pop up in their games, that people are like, for example, Battlefront 2, we're like, no, we don't want this in our game. Even other companies were talking about the other company doing bad stuff, and that made probably some dip in their sales, which naturally makes sure that the companies tend to not do it. So I think that's more important, and we shouldn't be able to punish companies more for those very blatant ones, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. We'll go over to some questions from the audience right now. So first question is, what about esports? Is it considered an addiction or a skill to be out? So esporters play a lot of, spend a lot of time. Are they in danger of being? Is this considered an addiction, or how? What about esports?
Maybe it helps to compare it to, for example, soccer. If, let's say, you are a fanatic soccer player, then is it an addiction or not? It depends a lot on other factors. Are you not going to school anymore to play soccer? Are you not seeing friends anymore to play soccer? Are you staying up until 2 o'clock at night to play soccer against the wall on your own? And esports are, in a way, I'm not sure if I would call it an art, but there are some people who are very talented in it, and if you're good at it, and you find ways to be at the top 0.001%, then and you can entertain people, and you can be excel really in it. Why not? Sure. But I think the issue sometimes that I see a lot with young people is that they use becoming an esport champion as an excuse to then play 10, 20 hours, maybe 20 is a bit lot, but 10, 15 hours a day. And then when their parents want to do something, they're like, oh, you're taking away my dream, But that doesn't make any sense. It's not about playing as much as you can. There's a lot of other factors that need to be taken into account if you want to make it in esports. Among one is, of course, talent and skill and capability. But also, like many professional esporters, they have lives besides esports, and that's something we should not forget to mention.
That's when we're talking about players, but also esports also generates a huge fandom, and these people they're not necessarily playing the game, but they're watching a lot of the games, so they're also spending a lot of time before the screen. Is there a risk to get addicted to watching esports? Because then the argument of being a pro doesn't really hold ground anymore. Rosanna, I see you're nodding to that.
Right. Yeah, esports is completely on the rise, of course, and it's a kind of new way of watching television. Instead of watching television, you watch other people play. But it's also a way of learning. For some players, they watch others just to find new tricks and how they can get better by watching others. On the other hand, it's the same as watching television and being a binge watcher. From the moment that it intervenes with your other activities in life and it takes too much time and it becomes a kind of a preoccupation that's the only thing that you are still doing, then it's a problem. But if it's more a balanced way, and instead of watching television or listening to music, you watch others play esports, I don't think that's a problem at all. But the problematic part with esports is that we are again ending up in a world that is very much interesting for betting. And then we end up in the whole blurring lines between the gaming and the gambling once again.
Yeah, and I can react to that. And maybe a lot of people don't know this, but if you do esports tournaments, you have to ask permission from the makers, the publisher of the game. And there is no publisher that allows betting or even advertisements for gambling during esports tournaments. If this happens, then it is something that it is not okay for the publishers. It can happen, of course, but they have ways to try to discover it. If they don't discover it, well, it'll pass. But rest assured that this is something that is not allowed, and those organizers, tournaments will lose their license and will not be able to do it on a legal way anymore using that game. So I think this is very important message. Something else is that the esports federations in this country, they always tell the tournament organizers and they urge them to not allow too young children in the area or be able to join these tournaments. So there is really a lot of things that the sector is doing to avoid these things. But yes, esports betting, it's happening. I cannot ignore this or say that it's not happening, but it's illegal as far as publishers are concerned.
That was the questions concerning esports. We're of course finding ourselves currently in a very specific situation where a lot of people have to spend time indoors and maybe spend more time playing games. do you think games could be some sort of a form of therapy in a way, or perhaps leave be used to cope with negative emotions? Can games be also therapeutic, even games with addictive elements built into them? Yeah, Arne. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. I do think that they might, and on top of that, I do think that they might, even without the current situation we're finding ourselves in. We are in COVID times, yes, for sure, and people are staying more indoors. And I do think that games can help a lot of people with coping with being indoors and spending their time in a somewhat productive way. Because games are, I'm mostly talking about online games, still a way to meet new people and find community and actually have social contacts. If we're talking about single player games, then it becomes more in the realm of just spending your time, right? But what I'm mostly asking on top of that question, rather, is if there would actually be negative effects after this period of COVID. That would make sense if people would, for example, play more games right now because they're alone at home, right? It's a fun time. And then when COVID ends, suddenly they find themselves in a situation where they kind of don't need to go outside anymore. I want to stick to the thing that they've been used to a couple of months already. I'm actually pretty interested in whether that could be the case, and I'm asking anyone if that might actually be an occurrence that we might be seeing. David?
Well, we did a small study on that after the first lockdown. So we had the first lockdown coming in, and then you saw that the average playtime rose a bit. But as soon as lockdown, was eased a bit, and then we had the summer and everything was great, and then we just went into wave 2. But in that summer period, actually playtime went down again to normal levels. So we believe that this situation will be okay. People will go out again. People will meet people in person again. So we think this will be okay. But it is true that a lot more people are playing games, and even people that didn't play games before are playing it now, and especially back catalog. So games that already were in the market are having a huge amount of extra players. So yeah,
I think there will be. I've been thinking a lot about like what's going to happen after the lockdown, and I think there's going to be two things. There's going to be two groups of people. One group of people, they're going to be like, yes, these are like the kids. You're not going to be seeing them at home for weeks. They're going to be to festivals. They're going to be to parties. They're going to meet with friends. They're going to do all these other things, and they're going to enjoy, going out and doing all these things. But then you'll have a small group of people, usually the people that get into some difficulties with gaming, unfortunately. And these are the guys like, if I, like the stories I hear every day from parents is like he has school at home. He's supposed to study, or he's supposed to be in class, and in the background he's watching Twitch, he's playing games, he's listening to YouTube, all these things. Just even sitting still and focusing on the class is so difficult with all these, very tempting other things next to them, and within reach. So studying from home is very, very, very difficult for them. But that's what they've, many of them have been doing for the past year, more or less. And these guys are going to have an incredibly difficult time in September and October when they have to go back to school, because they've just had almost 1.5 years of vacation. And then they have to go back to school, sitting in a class 8 hours a day with people, which is stressful for these guys, and concentrating, not being able to distract themselves with other things. And they are going to have a very difficult time. It's going to be very challenging for them.
Yeah, well, could be, but I'm hearing of kids that even during school hours at school use their cell phone the whole time. So I think the distinction between following class from home or school if you have that screen, and I think it's really important, and I also think what Matthias said is important, it's sometimes about screen time. It's not only about video games. I think it's, I'm glad that this is also highlighted in this discussion, because for instance, I mean, we sometimes have the feeling as a sector that we are always being attacked and that we are the big culprits and the big bad monsters. But there are a lot of things on the screen, and the screen is so close by. You can even use it in class. My son, when he goes to school, they can use it in class. So I'm like, why? Why is this happening? And so in that way, I think it could be a problem, but I don't think it has any direct link with working and studying from home. Sorry.
Ozan?
What I see right now is that many parents who are at home and have a look at what their children are doing behind screens, that they have the impression that the time goes up of playing games. But of course, you have to look or you have to see it in perspective, because when you have more time, free time, of course, you can spend it more on screens and gaming. And it doesn't mean that everything goes bad out of the gaming scene, let's say. So if you have more time, then you can spend more time gaming. But if you're still interested in going out and play soccer with your friends for the moment, that's still or it's possible again once more. I don't think then that there is a problem. It's a kind of balance, let's say. And when we look at teenagers or adolescents right now, they are using many screens at the same time. Even when they are watching television, they are using their laptop and they're using their smartphone at the same time. So, of course, I can understand that parents are a bit worried that their children are supposed to be in front of their screen for school, but they're doing something else in the meantime. Yeah, it depends a bit on what is happening on the screen for school, of course, as well. So I don't think it doesn't have to be a complete alarm phase as such.
Arne?
It actually, I think it also doesn't really have that much to do about like the actual metrics of time that people spend on their screens and on their games. It, like Matthias mentioned, it's already like the cloudiness between I'm working for school and on the second window that I have, I can play Twitch or I can play games. Like the muddying of the work zone and the play zone might actually leave some consequences for people that later on go back to school and suddenly find themselves in a situation where they can not focus at all on their school because they've been accustomed to a whole year just multitasking and watching their lessons and then immediately playing a game. I'm not sure of this, but I'm kind of wondering. I think that it's kind of underestimated to say that in the summer vacation of last year, that people went outside and that we only look at the metrics. Well, it's maybe also a very important thing to look at the psychology of mixing those workspaces and how people actually will leave another way of thinking after COVID. That's what I think.
Sure. There's one. When we talk about game addiction, there's also you talk about the addiction loop, which is similar for all addictions, also alcoholism and drug addicts. So recovering alcoholics and drug addicts, they need to stay completely sober because there's always the risk they will relapse. Do you think it's the same for people who suffer from game addiction? Matthias?
So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, it's important to know if you feel that you are sensitive to getting addicted to gaming. For example, like alcohol, for example, I have bottles here from 5 years ago. I don't care, Maybe sometimes I will drink a little glass here and there on a social occasion, but it doesn't interest me. I will never in my life get addicted to alcohol. But give me a whole week and nothing to do, and internet and games, and chances are, maybe I will start gaming again. And so, because that, and why is that? Is because in my case, it's been a big part of my youth. For me, I mean, personally, I feel that age from 12, 13, 14 years to about 20 years old, that is like a really formative time in your life. The habits you learn then, how you deal with stress, how you deal with anxiety, how you deal with everything, chances are those are going to be your habits for the rest of your life. If you are used to stress, dealing with stress in a way like, oh, I'm going to turn myself off from the world, I'm going to go in my cocoon and block myself from the world, and chances are those are going to be your first responses to dealing with stress later in life as well. And hopefully, if you grow as a person, you'll develop better techniques of dealing with stress. So other people have other ways of dealing with difficult times. But for me, whenever I feel difficult or I have issues, like a relationship that ended, the first thing I did was I wanted to play games again, and I played 23 hours from Friday to Saturday night until I fell asleep on my laptop. That's when I decided I'm going to take a few months, no more internet at home and no more computer. I give it to a friend. That's another story. But then I was, I think, 28, 29 years old, and then I realized, like, whoa, this is still a part of me. But a lot of it has to do with that it took until 22, 23 years old. So the younger people are, when they learn how to deal with game addiction, the better they can manage it. And to answer your question, I think the younger people are to learn this, the more chances they have of developing a healthy gaming habit. And perhaps they can still have gaming as a hobby. But if it is not tackled until they're 23, 4, 5 years old, then the chances are maybe it's better to say, no more gaming. Yeah, probably.
Do you agree
Depending
with
on the
this,
person.
Arne?
Yeah, to a certain extent, I do agree with the points that Matthias made, for sure. I also think that it's pretty important to consider that children do have the tendency to be addicted or seem more addicted to games more because they kind of have more time on their hands. Me personally, I did play a lot of games when I was younger. Once I started joining DAE, Digital Arts Entertainment, I stopped gaming for some reason, and that was not necessarily because too much work. Yeah, that's the general thing that people say, like, it's too much work, but also because the void of not having anything to do. I mean, you have to consider as somebody who's in the high school age, right? Before the 16-year-old, say, for example, somebody who's 12 years old, right? That person might actually not be able to do anything else with their time, like go outside with friends or like meet up at a bar or like study together, because they're that young and they have so much time. But I mean, they're at home, right? So it's much less freedom yet still. And that makes a very big gap to be filled with gaming, right? But that's personally for me at least, once you got more freedom and once you can do more stuff and you see that it's important to do other stuff as well, then some people do actually tend to stop gaming the more they get into adulthood and get older. And I'm not quite sure if that's like a special thing or maybe that I wasn't quite addicted enough to the game. But I would reckon that children, for example, should get a bit more slack because they have more time and less freedom. And therefore, they might seem as if they're spending too much time with games.
I see. Thank you. To wrap up, I have one final question for you guys. So gaming is getting a lot more mainstream mainly lately. There are a lot more different platforms. Game streaming is coming up. So there's a lot more people who are starting to play games. So how do you think gaming disorder, gaming addiction will evolve in the future as a result of more people playing games, basically? Joel?
Well, I think because it came up during the panel a few times as well, is I think it's going to more develop to be a subset of a different type of disorder where it's more about how much time are you spending watching your screen or watching Netflix and stuff. Because I feel like you can have someone that plays only 2 hours a day or something, but then they're on their laptop from when they wake up till they go to bed. They are maybe not addicted specifically to just games, but they are addicted to their screens. And I feel like it might develop more towards that people start realizing, okay, gaming is a problem, but maybe especially during the lockdown, people are spending so much time on their laptop or on their computer. They're doing stuff like Netflix or other things, and they're using those systems to, for example, forget about problems in their real life or to not have to worry about school, just like games are used for that by some people. So I think it's going to evolve more towards that there's hopefully going to be more research into it, and that people realize that it's not just video games as a medium that are being harmful to some people, but the electronic system around them as well.
David?
Yeah, I want to add to the research part. So I also believe, and as a sector, we also believe it's very important to do a lot more research, scientific research, thorough research on a long term, not just small fragments, because it's very difficult, of course, to say if a kid at 8 or 10 opens a loot box that he will become a gambler at the age of 20. How can you say something like that without studying this? And I also want to make a final remark, is that as a sector, we are understanding that we need to collaborate in this research. And so I want to make reference to a research that has been done very recently by the Oxford Internet Institute, which is the first video game research where actual player data has been used. It was about well-being of players, and actually it was a small but significant link with well-being and people playing games, so a positive well-being. And also something that is very interesting is that the research showed that during surveys where people disclose and declare how much time they play and what they do with video games, actually they always overshoot that time, because the actual gameplay time was much lower than what people actually say. So we believe this is an interesting path, and bear with us. We, as a sector, we have to get to grips with this. It's new for us. We haven't shared data, player data before for game research, but we are willing to do so, and we think it is the way forward. Much more research has to be done before just assuming a lot of things. I think that's something we need to avoid.
Okay, that's a clear message. Lane, you also wanted to add something to that? You're still
Sorry,
muted.
yes.
Yeah. You're muted again.
Yes, sorry. First of all, research is much needed again. We know that there is a big gap on that, and that much more research is needed. And of course, kind of collaboration can always be useful. What I want to add also, because the question was, once you were addicted beforehand, once you were addicted, should you go off grid completely to get cured? But it's very complicated in the world right now, because we are connected for work, for a school, almost like every moment of working hour. I'm on the internet for doing research. So it's very complicated to say to somebody, stop your screen time, because then basically they should stop working also. So I'm very curious about studies also in the future, how this internet society is going to have an impact also on gambling addiction, gaming addiction, and screen addiction in general, because it's something we simply cannot live without for the moment.
Somebody else still wants to add something to that? Rosanne?
I would like to. I think Lynn has pointed at a very important thing, because it's not possible to go cold turkey in a networked society right now. So I think we have to study and look at balanced media use in the future, just to keep track of that. And we need to be able to ask people to be aware of what they are doing and to have a healthy platter when it comes to media use. And when I heard David talking about the necessary research in the future, then I think that the gameable research is exactly trying to do and fill the void, because we want to look at the long-term run, let's say, and have a look at, is simulated gambling actually going further down the road towards real gambling? And for the moment, there are no real results about it. So we need to find that out for the future.
All right, everyone's got their work cut out from them then. I would like to thank all the experts, all the students, everyone who submitted questions. Sorry if they didn't get answered, but we only have so much time. I think we all took away some interesting things from this discussion. And thank you all for joining, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you all so much for joining tonight. We hope you gathered some really insightful points from this discussion tonight. I know that we did, and as always, we really enjoyed being in the chat with you all and seeing the panel discussion. So, in case you would like to watch the upcoming Game for Thought streams, we would love to have you. On the 18th of March, we will be having a stream right here in the level about ethics, AI, and the progress of technology. And on the 22nd of April, we will have our last Game for Thought stream of the academic year about the social dilemma. So we'll be talking more about social media and privacy. A big, big thank you to all those on our team that made this possible for tonight. So thank you to Sandra, Carlos, Catalina. Thank you, Alexander, our sound guy. Thank you, Bert and Luna, who are our tech experts. And of course, thank you to our Master Chief, who makes all of this possible. And thank you as well to Bros from Quindo. There will be actually a Game for Thought podcast that will be supplementing the stream in the very near future. So if you'd like to get Game for Thought content every 2 weeks, you can definitely look forward to the podcast in addition to this stream. And of course, thank you to all of our panel participants for the evening. Thank you to Roseanne, Lean, David, Christoph, Matthias, David. Thank you to all, and the student panelists, of course. Thank you, Joao and Arna. You did a wonderful job. So thank you. Have a wonderful night, and we will see you next time on March 18th.